Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's video, if you have any idea, is all going to be about developing film. I've never ever developed any film in my life, so this is completely new to me, and beyond reading the manual and looking at some videos online, this experience now is going to be my first time. I did spend a little bit of time before the video trying to set up this, because when I did my research into the use of the lab box, most bad results come from incorrect configuration of the reels. So I've taken some time to be confident with myself that they are correct. There's kind of L's and R's that you match up, and then certain arrows which allow you to fit the reels into the grooves correctly, and then that should be sufficient. So we'll see. So I'm going to consult my notes because obviously I've never done this before. So yeah, let's get on with it. So why develop at home? Up until recently I've been fairly happy with sending my film off to a lab to be developed. There's a couple of issues with that. Obviously it takes time. You know, you haven't got the instant results like you have with digital. You've got to send the film off, then you've got to wait for them to be developed before they come back. So by developing at home, this should hopefully speed that process up. Also, it can be quite expensive to get film developed, especially here in the UK. It was costing me about £3.50 a roll and £3.25 delivery. So it soon tots up. If you, like me, you're only really going through a roll or two every month or so. And then because of that, I probably didn't process or use film quite as much as I probably would like to. Another reason for trying to develop my own film is control. When you send off the film, it's completely outside your hands. You don't know what the developer is doing with the film, you know, whether they're following strict procedures to minimise dust, scratches to the film, and also you've got no idea what kind of chemistry they're using in order to process and develop the negatives. Furthermore, the last roll of film I've got back had scratches all over it, so I don't know whether that was the lab or whether the film was duff or the camera caused it. I just don't know. But I thought that now would be a great opportunity to see whether film developing at home suits me and allows me to be more creative with my photography. So when I started down the road that I decided I wanted to develop my own film, I obviously looked how I go about that. I think as well, probably seeing this kind of equipment made me think that actually developing at home could be possible, and that it's easier than it was in the past, because I haven't got any room for a dark room. So this seemed like a nice, neat solution that you can just do at home, and then when you finish with it, it could just go away in a cupboard, rather than having to have a dedicated area with a full dark room setup. When I was looking at equipment, you can obviously do it the old-fashioned way with what they call Patterson tanks and a changing bag, but that involves getting the film onto these similar kind of reels, which then go into these tanks, all in the dark in effect, with these changing bags or a dark room. And I just didn't really think that appealed to me so much. So with this option, it's called the lab box. It's effectively a daylight developing tank, so I can literally develop it here in front of you in relatively light conditions. It's made by a company called ars-imago, an Italian firm, and I know this started off as a Kickstarter project, and now it's available to buy. It's quite an expensive bit of kit. It costs about 180 quid new, but I managed to get this second hand on eBay. But as you can probably see, it's in immaculate condition, and I don't think it's ever been used, other than the guy assembled the reels. But for my own reasons, and because I know that that's where problems tend to arise from, I disassembled that and put it together in my own kind of like way, following the instructions, so I can be confident that that's set up the way it should be in accordance with the instructions. So as you can see, as well as the lab box, I've also had to invest in some other equipment, and of course the chemistry that I'm going to be using to develop the film. All in, everything here, including the lab box, probably cost me about 250 quid, so conventionally that's probably about 30 rolls of film. I'm starting with black and white because it's supposed to be a bit more straightforward in terms of the temperatures you need for the chemistry. It's a flat 20 degrees for the standard kind of setup, whereas colour and slide film, reversal film requires a lot more chemicals, and the temperatures vary as well. So I thought, to start me off, I've bought a load of cheap black and white film so I can nail down the process and get comfortable with using the equipment before I start putting through film that I kind of hope there's some good images on there and I don't want them to go to waste. So to that end, to start off with, I'm going to be developing 120 film. Right, so just to give you a lowdown on the equipment, we've obviously got the lab box, which I'll assemble in a minute. I also bought some containers to basically distill the chemicals into. I'll come on to it later, but some of them are kind of, once they've been mixed into a working solution, they're one shot, one time use. But there are some of the chemicals which you can reuse over and over until they're kind of spent. So I'll get into that in a minute. I've also bought a mixing jug to obviously mix the chemicals, a funnel to decant the mixtures back into the bottles, and then also when I'm doing the developing, I can decant them back into the bottles as well when I finish using them. I also bought a small little beaker for measuring some of the smaller quantities of the liquids, and down here as well there's a syringe to use, because some of the quantities of chemicals, and certainly the developer, you only need literally 5 to 10 ml for the quantity that I'm going to be using in the lab box. So also there's a thermometer which I'll use to ensure that the working solutions are at 20 degrees centigrade. So other equipment is some string to set up or rig up like a drying rail in the bathroom, and then some clips to clip it onto there, and then you're supposed to get one of these which is like a weighted clip, which allows the negatives when they come off the reel to kind of hang straight and hopefully keep any curls and help the drying process. So in terms of chemistry, obviously I did a lot of research into what I need to use. The first thing you need to do in any film developing is you need to develop the film. So I did some research and I've decided I'm going to use Kodak HC110 to develop. I've also, which I'm not going to use today, got some Rodinal, but just because this seems to get more consistent results from what I've read, I'm going to use this developer today. So like I said, I'm only going to be using 9 ml of this a bit later on. So once you've developed it, and according to my app, the massive DevChart app, which basically allows you to work out quite simply what development times you need for your film that you've chosen, and also the developer you've chosen. The other stages are not quite as critical for me. Just starting out, they're not quite as critical. Once the developer's finished doing its thing, we'll come on to timings in a minute. You then need to do what's called a stop bath. I've chosen Ilford Stop to carry out that process for me. So once you've stopped the development, you then need to fix the development. So again, I've gone for Ilford's tried and tested rapid fixer to carry out that duty. And then finally, most people use just plain water just to rinse the film and wash it, but I read that by adding an additive like Kodak's Photo Flow to the mix, it can help with drying and reduce any kind of like drying marks or whatever on the film. So I thought I'd give that a go. So there's quite a lot of chemicals used, a lot more than I was kind of expecting getting into film photography. And I know there's certain products on the market called monobaths which you can use, which cut down the amount of chemicals and make it a little bit more simpler. But I thought before I try those more modern techniques, I try and stick to more traditional methods first and get them right in my workflow before I advance onto other more experimental kind of chemistry. So obviously with this being my first use, I didn't want to use film that I'd kind of used over the last few weeks, and I've been going to different places, taking images very carefully that I'm kind of happy with and really looking forward to process. So I wanted to kind of, while I'm testing it, just go out, shoot some film quickly so that it's not so much of a concern if something goes wrong and they don't come out how I would hope that they would turn out. So before we begin, I need some film to test. So I'll go out with the Holga and load it with some Neopan 400 from Fujifilm and just go out around the local vicinity, take some shots and come back and we'll see what they can be developed like. So be right back. Right, so I've come back, I've taken this roll of film, now I'm going to wind it to the end and take it out. I think that's about there. And there we go. Right, so before I begin, I'll just assemble the lab box. Right, so let's clip the module 120 back on, like so. That's fairly secure. Right, let's put the reel back in. The box obviously comes with a standard turning knob, but mine came with an optional crank which is supposed to help with the agitation. This in effect guides the film onto the reels. Right, so just put that out of the way for the moment. With the lab box you can either choose to continually agitate, so with that method you just need 300 ml of chemicals and then you're agitating the reel inside of the box constantly while it's developing, stopping, fixing and rinsing. So obviously it's a lot more labour intensive, but you only need a portion of the liquid. The alternative is you can have intermittent agitation, and with that you fill up the box with 490 ml of chemicals and then you don't need to agitate for quite as much. But when I've done some research seems to indicate that constant agitation gives a much more consistent, better results. So that's the method that I'm going to use. So 300 ml liquid for all my developing chemicals and constant agitation, which will be much better with the optional crank accessory. So let's mix some chemicals, shall we? So there's a couple of different ways you can develop with Kodak's HC110. I've opted for their B dilution, which is 1+31 parts. So what does that mean? That means about 9.3 ml of this stuff and the rest, so 290.6 ml of water. So let's get mixing. Right, so that's the developer done. I'll just put that back in there for now. Right, so the next chemical I need is some stop bath. So for this I'm going to use the Ilfra stop. So the working solution for this is 1+19. So that is 15 ml of Ilfra stop and then 285 ml of water for a 300 ml working solution. I also went for these chemicals first because, like I said before, I only develop probably a couple of rolls a month. So like the problem with monoblasts is they don't have a particularly long shelf life, whereas these things, they can last for a pretty long time. So that's why I went for these. Right, so let's pour this in. Again, I'm just going to give this a bit of a stir. With this one, you can reuse this one because it has a dye in it, so when it's spent, it'll turn purple. So as you can see, it's yellowy orange now, so it's all good to go. So there we go, we've got my developer and we've got the stop bath. Next is the fixer. Again, another solution which when you mixed up you can reuse it about 20 times. So for this one it's 1+4, so for a 300 ml working solution that's 60 ml of the liquid and then the rest 240 ml of water. There we go, so I've got my developer, my stop bath and now my fixer. The last thing I need for today is my wetting agent, or using PhotoFlow, which is a one shot again, you don't reuse it because look how much you get and you only need about 1.5 ml of this solution every time. So now with all these dilutions, it basically tells me I've got a development time of 5 minutes for Fuji Pan 400 with a 1+31 dilution of HC110, and then the stop bath for a minute, fixing for a further 5 minutes, and then a final wash of about 10 minutes of water, and then the final rinse for 30 seconds with the PhotoFlow solution. So obviously before that happens, we need to put the film into the lab box, and that will be my next challenge. And I know, even though I only took these photos earlier today, I still want them to turn out alright, because actually when I was out, as you can see from the B-roll, I had quite a bit of fun and I think I captured some really good compositions. So I really hope for this video and for me that this development works. Right, so now I think we're ready to put the film into the developing tank. So for this I'm going to be using the manual like a hawk because I don't want anything to go wrong. So I've also checked as well, I've been able to see that I have correctly aligned the reels according to the manual. So fingers crossed, if it does fail, it won't fail on that aspect. Right, and I've checked the guide reels, they're out as far as they can, so that should hopefully guide the film onto the reels. Right, so the knob, there's a knob here, that's got to be into the downward arrow symbol to open the film chamber. So you feed the black paper through the rear slit. Like so. And place the roll in the film slot. So it's in the slot and the backing paper is there. Close the grey lock. The grey lock is closed, as well as the lid. So see you later, film, for now. So the theory being is you pull the paper out through the slits, and the theory being is that while you're pulling this out, the film is automatically being wound into the lower lightproof chamber behind this kind of knob. So fingers crossed. Whew. That was a good start. Nope, it's not going anywhere. Right, I'm going to have to open it to see what's gone wrong. Oh. Maybe it just got trapped on the clip. So let's have that another go. Right, fingers crossed this will work this time. Oh, not going well. Right, what I did then, which seems to have done the trick, so I just wiggled the slot just to see whether that helped, and that does seem to have actually helped a lot. And it's just the backing paper which is coming out, which is always a good thing. Right, so it does say you'll feel resistance in 3 hours. I'm not sure whether that's a good sign or not. So then we'll carry on through and see whether I've actually pulled too hard and broken the whole thing off. So it then says turn the 120 knob counterclockwise into the closed position square symbol. It says now you can tear away the paper, but obviously I might have pulled too hard, so I hope I haven't ruined it there. Right, so it says now open the lid and remove the spool. So this is where it could all have gone horribly wrong. Okay, open that. Okay, I can only see the spool, so that's good. So there's a bit of paper here. Ah, and I can see the film. So that's looking good. It says remove the adhesive from the film, so I'm going to try and peel this away. Right, so there we go, there's the adhesive. Again, this is where a lot of people have failed in the past. They've pulled the film out in order to clip on the clip and then expose the first frame of the film, and therefore kind of rendering it kind of useless. I did kind of try and mitigate that when I was out taking some photos earlier by taking the same shot twice to begin with, just in case for that eventuality on my first run. Right, so let's go back and see whether I can clip this on in the middle. Right, so I've got my ruler. So I'm going to clip it down. Right, I'm kind of tempted here, just because it's my first roll, just to wind it a little bit, just to check that the film does go down into the guide. Partly as well because it's old film, and I probably didn't take that into account to begin with. That's probably why I should have used probably newer film on the first roll, just so that for any aging effects to the film wouldn't have affected it as much. Well, I'm happy that that's going into the guide as intended, so I'm going to now follow the instructions to the letter as best I can. Close the lid and turn the 120 knob, so this is the 120 knob, triangle position, to open the chamber and close the film. So here we go. So now the lightproof chamber is open, and release the film. Right, so the knob is in the correct position. Now it says I've got to turn the knob gently in order to wind the film onto the reel. Right, here we go. It is quite disconcerting. Right, so that to me feels like the film has been wound successfully onto that reel. I've never heard it before, but to me there was a lot of noise and then it went silent, so that to me seems to suggest that the roll of film is correctly in place, and now we can start to develop once the water is at the correct temperature. So there we go. Right, 20 degrees, right, I'm ready to begin. So 5-minute development, 1 minute, stop, 5-minute fixing, and final wash at 10:30. One thing I've got to do, every 30 seconds or so, I've got to just tip the box just to make sure the edges get developed as well. Right, okay, right, let's begin. Go, start the timer. Right, let's get my funnel. Definitely a different colour to when it went in. Just going to put that there a minute while I pull in the stop. Continue. Add the fixer. Another 5 minutes of this. I'm probably talking to myself, the video's probably stopped. This is definitely the smelliest stage. Right, we're into the final wash. So right, let's just take the lid off a minute. Let's hope for the best. The good thing is the film is on the reels, so that's the best I could have hopeful really. Put it back on a minute. So I'm going to empty out the fixer. So now that's done, I can now take off the lid, disconnect the module, and I can go and rinse this. We have film. Well, I'm really pleased. My first roll of film in the lab box, and I've actually got some results. The next video you see, I'll take you through the images I've taken on the video. So the negatives are now dry. I've cut them into strips of 3 and I've put them into my negative folder. I've digitized them using my camera and my macro lens setup. I've then converted them into positive images using an action in Photoshop. I did a video previously on my current method for digitizing film negatives into digital image. Feel free to check it out, I'll put a link in the description below. I then did some minor post-processing of the images in Lightroom 5 just to do a bit of dodging, burning on the highlights and the darker areas just to get the image to where I wanted it to be. So out of the 12, I came away with about 8 images that I was really happy with, and probably 2 or 3 of those that I really think are some of my favourite that I've taken with the Holga. So as I said, I was happy with 8 images, so obviously that meant 4 from the roll of 12 didn't make the final cut. As you will recall, I intentionally knew I was going to lose one straight away when I wanted to make sure that the film went onto the roller inside the lab box correctly, because it was my first time and I was a little bit worried about the film because it was expired and old, and I was a bit worried it wasn't going to go onto the lab box correctly. One I lost as well because I think I forgot to take the lens cap off, and a further 2 of the images were duplicates almost of other images where I tried a different composition or I waited for slightly different light just to see which one of the 2 images I would have preferred best. So when I finished processing all these images, I also was keen to look to see how they compared to other Holga images that I got previously processed in a lab. So as you see now, I've overlaid one of my favourite images I've taken with the Holga, a shot that I took down in Kimmeridge earlier in the year. And I thought, looking at that one and looking at mine, and I looked at some of the others I've taken with the Holga before, and I thought that mine that I developed in the lab box were easily comparable. If anything, I thought my photos this time were a little bit better. Maybe that's because I've got a bit more experience with using the Holga, so I'm pretty chuffed with how my film has come out. So as you saw earlier, I had some real trouble getting the backing paper out the lab box correctly, and it took some force and some wiggle of the dial to actually complete that task. So when I was cleaning the lab box after the video, I discovered something that might have accounted for these difficulties. So here's the Holga camera. So inside the Holga, there's these bits of foam, which should be stuck in to the camera. The idea with this foam is it increases tension on the roll of film. So this piece of foam, I found it inside the lab box. So somehow during the process, this film migrated from the camera to the roll of film to the lab box. And then that, I suspect, when I was trying to pull the tape away from the film, was kind of almost creating that tension and basically some resistance which stopped it coming out of the lab box. And then when I wiggled the chamber, that actually then fell through into the void where the film then spooled into the light sealed chamber of the lab box. And then of course it wasn't until after, when I cleaned it, that I discovered the piece of offending foam. Because it's not fixed inside the camera, it became loose and it kind of wrapped itself around the roll of film between the backing paper sheets. So then of course it went into the lab box like that. Yeah, so that's obviously the 120mm chamber. And then, like I said, the foam had dislodged itself into this area, and then miraculously it didn't affect the rest of the process. So hopefully when I affix this with some glue, some Gorilla Glue, it won't happen again. Another mistake I made when I was loading the film into the lab box as well is that I went too far but then pulled the backing paper free of the box. Whereas what you're supposed to do is when you kind of start to see the arrows basically at the start of the film, you're supposed to then at that point tear the backing paper away from the lab box. Then you're supposed to rotate the dial to basically make it light sealed. So then you open the lid and then you can take the rest of the backing paper and the adhesive tape off the film. So there we are for this video. It's probably ended up being quite long. So here are all of the final edited images that I shot using the Holga medium format camera with 120 Fuji Neopan 400 film, which I developed in the Daylight Development Tank, the lab box. I hope you like them. Thanks for watching this video. I really enjoyed making it despite the nerves of actually running through the developing process for the first time. Thanks again for watching.